The bright morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of JFK International Airport as a smartly dressed young black woman walked confidently toward the airline check-in counter. Her designer briefcase rolled smoothly beside her, and her perfectly pressed blazer marked her as a business professional. She had woken up extra early that morning, determined to make her West Coast meeting in style and comfort. The line at the premium check-in counter moved quickly, and soon she found herself facing a desk agent who barely looked up from the computer screen. The woman smiled warmly, despite the agent's cold demeanor. "Good morning. I'd like to check in for Flight 2317 to San Francisco, and I was wondering about possible upgrades to first class." The agent's eyes flicked up briefly, scanning her appearance with poorly disguised skepticism. "First-class upgrades start at $2,000 for this flight," she said with a slight smirk, her tone suggesting she was simply going through the motions of a conversation that would surely end in disappointment. Behind her, someone let out a quiet snort. The woman could hear the whispers starting, the kind she'd grown all too familiar with over the years. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit openly stared at her, while two younger business travelers exchanged knowing glances. She felt her heart rate quicken slightly, but her grandmother's words from years ago echoed in her mind. "Let their doubt be the fuel for your fire." Taking a deep breath, she maintained her professional composure, though the familiar weight of judgment pressed against her shoulders. "That sounds perfect," she replied evenly, pretending not to notice the sideways glances and poorly concealed reactions from fellow passengers. "I'd actually like to see all the available upgrade options, please." The desk agent's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. "Ma'am, as I mentioned, these are premium seats. The cost is quite—" She paused, searching for a diplomatic way to continue. "Substantial." The woman finished for her, reaching into her designer bag. "Yes, I heard you the first time. But you see, I've just closed a major deal for my firm on the East Coast, and now I need to present the results to our West Coast partners. First class would give me the space to prepare properly." A well-dressed couple behind her stopped their private conversation to watch the scene unfold. The woman could feel their eyes on her back, could practically hear their thoughts. She'd been in rooms where people underestimated her too many times to count, had pitched to clients who initially spoke only to her male colleagues, had sat through meetings where her ideas were ignored until a white colleague repeated them. But today felt different. Today, she had just signed the biggest deal of her career. Today, she had the power to make a point without saying a word. She pulled out her Platinum corporate card and Rewards membership card, placing them carefully on the counter. The morning sunlight caught the metallic finish of the cards, and she noticed the agent's eyes widen slightly. In that moment, she made a decision that would soon turn this ordinary morning into something extraordinary. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and prepared to show everyone in that terminal exactly why assumptions could be dangerous things. The terminal buzzed with its usual morning energy, the hum of rolling suitcases, the chatter of travelers, the muffled announcements over the PA system. But at this check-in counter, the air grew thick with anticipation. No one knew it yet, but they were about to witness something that would challenge their preconceptions and perhaps make them question their own biases. The woman's fingers drummed lightly on her Platinum card as she waited for the agent to process her request, her mind already several steps ahead, planning exactly how to turn this moment of prejudice into an unforgettable lesson in humility and respect. Standing at that check-in counter, memories flooded through her mind, taking her back to where her journey began. A modest two-bedroom house in Detroit, where the smell of her grandmother's sweet potato pie would fill the air every Sunday afternoon. Her mother worked 2 jobs, her father drove city buses, and together they showed her what real strength looked like. She remembered sitting at their scratched kitchen table, homework spread out before her, while her grandmother braided her hair and shared wisdom earned from decades of experience. "Baby," she would say, her fingers moving skillfully, "education is the one thing they can never take from you. Your mind is your greatest asset." Those words had carried her through high school, where she graduated as valedictorian, despite counselors suggesting she consider more realistic options than top universities. They sustained her through college, where she worked evenings at the campus library, saving every extra dollar while maintaining a perfect GPA. Her grandmother's Social Security checks, sent faithfully each month despite her own tight budget, had helped cover textbooks and meal plans. The corporate world had tested her in ways school never did. In her first job, coworkers would routinely ask if she was the administrative assistant rather than the marketing strategist. During client meetings, she learned to speak with unwavering confidence, even when she was the only black woman in the room. She developed a trademark style: impeccable suits, perfectly maintained natural hair, and a warm but professional demeanor that put others at ease while commanding respect. Her breakthrough came 3 years ago, when she spotted a pattern in market data that everyone else had missed. While senior executives dismissed her initial presentations, she persisted, refining her analysis until the evidence was undeniable. Her insight led to a campaign that brought in millions in new revenue, and suddenly, the same people who had ignored her were scrambling to get her attention. The promotion to partner had come with its own challenges. She overheard whispers about diversity hires and lowered standards, but she let her results speak for themselves. Quarter after quarter, her team outperformed expectations. She hired young professionals from all backgrounds, creating the kind of inclusive environment she wished she'd found when starting out. Yesterday's deal, the one that brought her to this airport, represented everything she'd worked for. She'd spent months analyzing data, building relationships, and crafting the perfect pitch. When the client's CEO shook her hand and signed the contract, she thought of that little girl at the kitchen table, dreaming of a future while her grandmother braided her hair. Looking down at her platinum card on the counter, she smiled, thinking about what her younger self would make of this moment. That scared but determined girl could never have imagined standing here, about to make a point that would resonate far beyond this terminal. Her grandmother's words echoed again. Sometimes, baby, the best response to ignorance is excellence. The past 15 years had taught her that success wasn't just about personal achievement. It was about opening doors for others. Every meeting where she spoke up, every presentation she nailed, every deal she closed made it a little easier for the next person who looked like her. She thought about all the young professionals she mentored, all the interns she championed, all the voices she amplified in meetings. Now, standing at this check-in counter with curious eyes on her back, she felt the weight of those experiences, those lessons, those small victories and painful setbacks. This moment wasn't just about a first-class upgrade. It was about challenging the assumptions people made when they saw her face, about showing that excellence comes in all colors, about making her grandmother proud. Her fingers rested calmly on the platinum card as she waited for the agent to finish typing. In her mind, she could almost smell that sweet potato pie, could almost feel her grandmother's gentle hands in her hair, could almost hear that beloved voice saying, "Show them who you are, baby. Show them what you can do." Time seemed to slow down at the check-in counter as she watched the agent's fingers hovering uncertainly over the keyboard. The morning bustle of the airport continued around them, but in this moment, everything felt crystallized, focused. She could feel the weight of all those stares on her back, could practically taste the assumptions in the air. The agent cleared her throat. "I can check availability for one first-class upgrade," she said slowly, her tone still carrying that edge of doubt. "Would you like me to do that?" A small smile played at the corner of her lips as an idea took shape in her mind. This was an opportunity, not just to prove someone wrong, but to make a statement that would stick with everyone who witnessed it. She pulled up her flight details on her phone, quickly scanning the seat assignment she'd been given in economy class. "Actually," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I'd like to know how many seats are available in first class right now." She could hear the whispers behind her growing louder, could sense the crowd's curiosity building. The agent blinked, thrown off script. "We have 8 first-class seats still available for this flight, she replied, clearly confused by the question. Perfect, she said, straightening her blazer. I'd like to upgrade row 23, all 6 seats, to first class, please. She placed her platinum card firmly on the counter, enjoying the way the agent's eyes widened in surprise. A gasp rippled through the crowd behind her. The businessman who had been smirking earlier suddenly found his shoes incredibly interesting. She heard someone whisper, "The entire row," in disbelief. The agent's fingers trembled slightly as she began typing. "Ma'am, that comes to," she stammered, calculating the total. $12,000, give or take. She finished smoothly. That's fine. Please process it on my corporate card. Her quarterly bonus from the deal she just closed was more than enough to cover it, and she knew this moment would be worth every penny. As the agent processed the transaction, she pulled out her phone again, this time opening her calendar. Her mind was already several steps ahead, planning how to use those extra first-class seats. She thought of the young professionals from underserved communities who were part of her mentorship program, the ones who rarely got to experience luxury travel. A few quick texts would ensure these seats wouldn't go to waste. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the new boarding passes. She noticed the agent's hands were shaking slightly as she handed them over, all traces of condescension gone from her manner. Your first-class boarding passes, ma'am. All 6 of them." She accepted the tickets with a gracious smile, tucking them carefully into her leather portfolio. The crowd that had gathered around the counter was dead silent now, watching as she gathered her belongings with unhurried dignity. Before turning to leave, she paused and looked directly at the agent. "Thank you for your help," she said warmly. "Oh, and you might want to let the first-class cabin crew know they'll be serving some first-time premium passengers today. I'm sure they'll want to make it extra special." As she walked away from the counter, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting behind her. But she wasn't focused on that anymore. She was already composing messages to her mentees, imagining their faces when they received an unexpected upgrade. Sometimes, she thought, the best way to break down barriers was to bring others up with you. Her heels clicked confidently against the airport floor as she headed toward security, her grandmother's words echoing in her mind once again. "When they go low, you go high, first class high." She smiled to herself, knowing that today's decision would ripple far beyond this terminal, touching lives in ways that those staring passengers could never imagine. The atmosphere in the terminal shifted dramatically in the wake of what had just happened. The check-in agent stood frozen, staring at the payment confirmation on her screen, her previous smugness replaced by a look of stunned realization. The receipt for $12,000 worth of upgrades seemed to mock all her earlier assumptions. Behind the counter, other airline staff who had been pretending not to watch the scene unfold were now openly staring. One of them whispered something to another, and soon the story began spreading through the terminal like wildfire. "Did you hear what just happened at Counter 7? The businessman who had been smirking earlier now looked thoroughly uncomfortable, tugging at his collar as he avoided eye contact with everyone around him. The 2 young professionals who had exchanged knowing glances earlier were frantically typing on their phones, no doubt sharing what they'd witnessed with their social networks. But the most touching reaction came from an unexpected corner of the terminal. A young girl, perhaps 12 or 13, sat with her mother at the nearby waiting area. She had watched the entire scene unfold with wide, attentive eyes. As our protagonist walked past, the girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, did you see that? Did you see what she did?" Her mother nodded, a proud smile playing on her lips. The girl's eyes sparkled with newfound possibility, seeing something she'd never witnessed before. Someone who looked like her refusing to accept disrespect, and doing it with such grace and power. The ripple effect continued as our protagonist made her way through the terminal. People who had witnessed the scene were already telling others, each retelling adding to the impact of the moment. A group of flight attendants huddled together, discussing how they would handle having a full row of first-time first-class passengers. Their usual script for premium service would need some adjusting today. At the security checkpoint, a TSA agent who had heard the story through the airport grapevine gave her a subtle nod of respect. "Have a wonderful flight," he said, with genuine warmth in his voice. She returned his smile, knowing that small moments of recognition like this were part of the change she hoped to inspire. Near the gate, she overheard snippets of conversations about what had happened. "I couldn't believe it when she pulled out that platinum card," one passenger said. "The look on that agent's face was priceless." Another added. But what caught her attention was an elderly gentleman telling his wife, "You know, it makes you think about how often we jump to conclusions about people." She settled into a seat at the gate area, pulling out her phone to check her messages. The responses from her mentees were starting to come in, shocked, excited, grateful messages that made her smile. One wrote, "I've never flown first class before. My hands are shaking just thinking about it." As boarding time approached, she noticed the gate agents preparing differently than usual. There was an extra flutter of activity, hushed conversations, and glances in her direction. Word had clearly spread about what happened at check-in, and no one wanted to risk making the same mistake. The check-in agent's face flashed in her mind again, and surprisingly, she felt no anger. Only hope that this experience would change how she treated the next person who approached her counter. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons came wrapped in moments of discomfort. She watched as more passengers filed into the gate area, many of them stealing glances at her, the woman who had turned a moment of prejudice into an opportunity for change. But she wasn't focused on their stares anymore. Her thoughts were on the young girl who had watched it all unfold, hoping that today's events would plant a seed of confidence that would grow into something beautiful. Opening her laptop to review her presentation one last time before the flight, she smiled to herself. In a few hours, her mentees would experience their first taste of first-class travel. The check-in agent would have a story she'd never forget. And somewhere in this terminal, a young girl was dreaming bigger dreams than she had when she woke up this morning. The first-class cabin hummed with an unusual energy as passengers settled into their seats. The young professionals who had received her unexpected upgrades tried to contain their excitement, but their wide eyes and barely suppressed grins gave them away. A flight attendant moved through the cabin, offering champagne with an extra flourish of warmth. Our protagonist sat in her window seat, watching the last streams of sunlight paint the wing golden. The businessman across the aisle, a different one from the check-in counter, kept glancing her way with undisguised curiosity. She could tell he had heard about what happened at the terminal. "That was quite something you did back there," he finally said, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and something like embarrassment. "I've been flying this route for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like it." She turned to him with a gentle smile. "Sometimes the best teaching moments come from unexpected places," she replied, accepting a glass of water from the flight attendant. As the plane took off, leaving the New York skyline behind, conversations began to flow naturally. One of her mentees, a brilliant young woman who had never flown first class before, shared her journey of starting a community coding program in her neighborhood. The businessman listened intently, his earlier awkwardness melting into genuine interest. "You know," he admitted during a lull in the conversation, "I realized something today. I've been in corporate America for 30 years, and I've probably made a lot of assumptions I shouldn't have." He paused, swirling his drink thoughtfully. "My daughter's starting her career now, and I hope she meets mentors like you." A senior flight attendant stopped by their row, her eyes twinkling. "I heard about what happened at check-in," she said quietly. "In 20 years of flying, that's the best response to rudeness I've ever encountered. We're making this flight extra special for your guests." Throughout the meal service, stories and experiences were shared across the aisle. A tech executive in the row behind them joined the conversation, talking about his company's struggles with diversity and asking thoughtful questions about how to do better. Instead of the usual silence of passengers working on laptops or sleeping, the first-class cabin had transformed into a space for honest dialogue. One of the young professionals shared how she'd faced similar prejudice at her first job. "But seeing how you handled that situation today," she said, her voice full of emotion, "it showed me a different way to respond. Power doesn't always have to be loud." As the flight progressed, our protagonist noticed how the other passengers had shifted from seeing her mentees as charity cases to recognizing them as valuable professionals with unique perspectives to share. The tech executive even exchanged business cards with one of them, impressed by her innovative ideas about market expansion. "You know what impresses me most?" the businessman said as they began their descent into San Francisco. "You could have just proven that agent wrong and upgraded your own seat. But instead, you chose to bring others up with you. That's real leadership." The flight attendant returned with fresh drinks before landing. "My daughter is in college," she confided. "I'm going to tell her this story tonight. She needs to hear about women like you." Looking around the cabin at the connections being made, the barriers being broken, and the perspectives being changed, she felt a deep satisfaction. Her grandmother had always said that real change happens in small moments, in everyday interactions where people suddenly see each other as human beings rather than assumptions. As the plane touched down in San Francisco, contact information was exchanged and promises were made to stay in touch. The businessman had invited one of her mentees to speak at his company's leadership conference. The tech executive was already typing notes about revamping his hiring practices. She gathered her belongings, knowing that what happened in this first-class cabin would ripple out into boardrooms, offices, and homes across the country. Sometimes the biggest changes start with a single moment of choosing to rise above, to lead by example, and to bring others along on the journey up. It started with a simple tweet from one of the passengers who had witnessed the check-in counter scene. "Just watched a woman respond to first-class ticket prejudice by buying upgrades for her entire row. The check-in agent's face was priceless. This is how you handle bias with grace." Hashtag first-class response. Within hours, the tweet had gained thousands of retweets. People began sharing their own stories of facing prejudice while traveling, at work, or in everyday situations. The hashtag first-class response quickly became a trending topic, taking on a life of its own as more witnesses from the airport added their perspectives. The young girl sitting next to me couldn't stop talking about what she saw. One person wrote, "She kept saying, 'Mom, I want to be like her when I grow up.' Representation matters." Hashtag first-class response. A business travel magazine picked up the story first. Their article, titled "How One Woman's Response to Airline Prejudice Sparked a Movement," detailed the incident and explored the broader implications for corporate culture. The story particularly resonated with professionals who had faced similar experiences. "My hands were shaking as I read this," commented one reader. "Last month, someone assumed I was the janitor in my own office building. I'm the CEO. These stories need to be told." Hashtag first-class response. The flight attendant's daughter had shared the story on her college campus social media groups. Soon, student organizations across the country were discussing different ways to respond to prejudice with dignity and success. The hashtag evolved to include stories of academic achievements, job promotions, and business successes. A popular morning show host shared the story on her social media, adding her own experience of being mistaken for kitchen staff at her first television job. "Sometimes the best revenge is success," she wrote. "But the greatest success is bringing others up with you." Hashtag first-class response. The tech executive from the flight posted about his experience. "Had a life-changing conversation at 35,000 feet. Proud to announce our company is revamping our hiring practices and launching a new mentorship program. Change happens one decision at a time." Hashtag first-class response. Videos from airport security cameras showing the moment had begun circulating online. The quiet dignity in her stance, the shock on the agent's face, and the powerful message behind the gesture resonated with millions. News channels picked up the story, interviewing passengers who had witnessed the scene. "What struck me most," said one interview subject, fighting back tears, "was how she turned a moment of humiliation into an opportunity to lift others up. That's real power." The young professionals who had received the upgrades shared their perspectives too. Their posts about experiencing first-class travel for the first time, while highlighting the meaningful conversations that took place during the flight, added another layer to the story. Corporate diversity trainers began using the incident as a case study. "Notice how she didn't just prove them wrong," one viral post explained. "She created a teaching moment that changed perspectives. That's the difference between revenge and revolution." Hashtag first class response. The businessman's daughter wrote a passionate LinkedIn post about her father's changed perspective after the flight. "My dad called me in tears," she wrote. "He said, 'I'm sorry if I ever made anyone feel the way that check-in agent made her feel.' Change is possible at any age." Hashtag first class response. Parents shared stories of using the incident to teach their children about dignity and resilience. Teachers incorporated the story into their lessons about respect and prejudice. The conversation had evolved beyond a single incident at an airport check-in counter into a broader discussion about responding to bias with grace and success. By evening, major networks were running the story in their primetime slots. But what made the biggest impact weren't the polished news segments or viral tweets. It was the thousands of personal stories being shared by people who had finally found the courage to speak up about their own experiences. The woman who started it all hadn't posted anything herself yet. She was busy in her San Francisco meetings, unaware that her quiet act of dignity had sparked a nationwide conversation about prejudice, power, and the choice to rise above while lifting others up. 3 days after the incident, the airline's CEO sat in his office, watching the viral videos for the 10th time. The morning's executive meeting had been entirely focused on this situation, and the flood of similar stories from other passengers had made it clear. This wasn't just about one check-in counter interaction. It was about a systemic problem that needed addressing. "Get her on the phone," he told his assistant. "Not for damage control, but because we need her help to fix this." Within an hour, a conference call was arranged, and the CEO found himself impressed by the calm, measured way she discussed the incident. "I'm not interested in anyone losing their job," she said firmly. "I'm interested in creating real change." Her words carried the weight of someone who had faced these situations too many times before. "Let's turn this into an opportunity to do better." The airline's response came the next morning, a public statement that went beyond the usual corporate apology. "We're not just sorry," the CEO announced in a press conference that was streamed live. "We're committed to being part of the solution." He outlined a comprehensive plan for change, starting with mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff. But the real surprise came when he announced their new consultant for diversity initiatives, the very woman who had exposed their shortcomings. "Sometimes your greatest teachers are the ones who show you where you need to improve," he said, his voice carrying genuine emotion. The check-in agent from that day was invited to be part of the solution too. Instead of facing punishment, she was asked to share her perspective during training sessions. "I've learned more from my mistake than I could have from any training video," she admitted to a room full of her colleagues, her voice shaking slightly. "We all have biases. The question is what we do about them." The training sessions were different from the usual corporate workshops. They included real stories from passengers, role-playing exercises, and honest discussions about unconscious bias. The woman who had sparked this change insisted that every session end with actionable steps, not just feel-good platitudes. Other airlines started paying attention. Within weeks, several major carriers announced their own diversity initiatives. Industry magazines ran features about changing corporate culture in the airline industry. Customer service training programs were being rewritten across the country. The ripple effect reached beyond airlines. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains began examining their own practices. if an airline can transform its culture this dramatically. One retail CEO noted, "What's stopping the rest of us?" The woman received hundreds of speaking invitations from corporations wanting to learn from her experience. But she chose carefully, agreeing only to engagements where she saw genuine commitment to change. "I'm not interested in being a token success story," she explained. "I want to see real transformation." In the airline's main training center, a new module was added to their customer service program. It didn't mention anyone by name, but it used the first-class upgrade incident as a case study in how unconscious bias can appear in everyday interactions, and how one moment of prejudice can become an opportunity for growth. 6 months later, the airline reported a significant decrease in customer complaints related to bias or discrimination. Employee satisfaction scores had improved too. The check-in agent, who had been at the center of the storm, had become one of their most effective trainers, sharing her story of transformation with every new hire. The woman who started it all still flew regularly for business. Flight crews now greeted her with genuine warmth, not just professional courtesy. Other passengers sometimes recognized her, not as the woman from the viral video, but as someone who had helped create real change in an industry that touched millions of lives. At a corporate leadership conference, someone asked her if she had planned for her actions to have such a big impact. She smiled and shook her head. "You never know which moment will be the one that sparks change," she said. "You just have to be ready to turn difficult situations into opportunities for growth. And most importantly, you have to remember to bring others up with you when you rise." The hashtag first-class response movement took on a life of its own, evolving far beyond that single moment at an airport check-in counter. What began as a viral story had transformed into a powerful message about responding to prejudice with dignity and success. One morning, a thick envelope arrived at her office. Inside was a carefully handwritten letter from the young girl who had witnessed everything at the airport that day. The girl's words were simple but powerful. "I saw you that day, and it changed how I see myself. Now I know exactly what to do when people underestimate me." The letter included a school essay the girl had written about the incident. Her teacher had given it an A+ and shared it with other classes. Soon, schools across the country were using the story in their lessons about dignity, respect, and standing up for oneself. Young professionals began sharing their own hashtag first-class response stories on social media. A doctor posted about buying coffee for everyone in line after someone assumed she was a nurse. A young architect described purchasing an entire row of VIP seats at a conference after being mistaken for a student. Each story added a new layer to the movement's message. Success is the best response to prejudice. Corporate training programs started incorporating these real-world examples. "It's not about shaming people," one diversity consultant explained. "It's about showing them a better way forward." Companies reported that these concrete examples resonated more with employees than abstract discussions about bias. The movement caught the attention of a renowned psychology professor, who began studying what she called the dignity response, the impact of responding to prejudice with success rather than anger. Her research showed that such responses were more likely to create lasting change in observers' attitudes. At a women's leadership conference, attendees shared their own stories of turning prejudice into opportunity. A young entrepreneur described how being underestimated by investors pushed her to build a $1 million company. A senior executive talked about mentoring junior colleagues through similar experiences. The original letter from the young girl inspired a nationwide letter-writing campaign. Young people wrote to their role models, sharing stories of facing prejudice and asking for advice. These letters were collected into a powerful online archive, creating a resource for others facing similar situations. Community organizations began hosting hashtag first-class response workshops, teaching practical strategies for handling bias with grace. The workshops emphasized the importance of not just rising above prejudice, but creating opportunities for others to rise too. A tech startup founded by two women launched an app that connected mentors with young professionals facing workplace bias. They named it First Class, and its logo featured an airplane wing. Within months, they had thousands of users sharing advice, opportunities, and support. The woman who started it all received an invitation to speak at a high school graduation. Looking out at the sea of young faces, she shared a simple message. Your success isn't just about proving others wrong. It's about proving others up. When you rise, bring someone with you. After her speech, a group of students shared their own stories of facing prejudice. One young woman had been told she didn't look like an engineer. Another had been discouraged from pursuing law because it was too competitive. Each of them now had a blueprint for responding with dignity. Professional groups began creating first-class fellowships, programs that provided mentoring, networking, and support to young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. The focus wasn't just on individual success, but on creating a network of support and opportunity. The movement's impact was measured not just in viral stories or corporate policies, but in countless small moments where people chose dignity over anger, success over resentment. Each story inspired more people to share their experiences, creating a ripple effect of change. 1 year after the airport incident, a survey showed that 70% of people who had heard about hashtag first-class response had changed how they handled prejudice in their own lives. The young girl who wrote that first letter was now leading her school's diversity club, teaching other students about responding to bias with grace and strength. 1 year after that memorable day at the airport, a group of young professionals gathered in a sunlit conference room in downtown Chicago. The space buzzed with energy as 30 participants prepared for the first official, first-class leadership workshop. The woman who had sparked it all stood at the front of the room, looking at the eager faces before her. Welcome to day one, she began, her voice warm and confident. Today, we're going to learn how to turn moments of prejudice into opportunities for change. On the wall behind her, a simple motto read, "Rise above, lift others." The workshop wasn't just about handling bias. It was about transforming the workplace itself. Participants learned practical strategies for maintaining dignity under pressure, but more importantly, they learned how to create opportunities for others once they reached positions of influence. A young professional raised her hand to share a story. Last week, someone mistook me for the receptionist at my own company, she said. Instead of getting angry, I remembered your story. I invited them to my department's strategy meeting. Now they're interested in collaborating on a major project. The workshop included role-playing exercises where participants practiced turning difficult moments into teaching opportunities. They learned the art of what they called elegant resistance, the ability to challenge prejudice while maintaining professionalism and creating positive change. During the lunch break, participants shared their own experiences. One woman described how she'd started a mentoring program at her firm after facing discrimination. Another talked about changing hiring practices at her startup. Each story added to a growing toolkit of practical responses to bias. The afternoon session focused on what they called the multiplier effect, how helping others rise could create exponential change. The woman shared stories from her own journey, including updates about the young professionals she upgraded to first class that day at the airport. One had recently started her own company. Another had been promoted to senior management. Success isn't just about getting to the top, she explained, drawing from her own experience. It's about changing what the top looks like. She described how her own corporate board had transformed over the past year, becoming more diverse and inclusive through intentional mentorship and opportunity creation. The workshop included a surprising guest speaker, the airline check-in agent from that day. She had become an advocate for change within her company and now helped train other customer service professionals. That moment changed my life, she admitted to the group. It showed me how unconscious bias can blind us to people's true potential. As the day progressed, participants worked on developing their own action plans. They called them first-class blueprints, Detailed strategies for not just achieving personal success, but for creating pathways for others to follow. The plans included mentorship commitments, hiring strategies, and specific ways to challenge systemic bias. The most powerful moment came when participants shared their legacy goals, what they hoped their impact would be in 5 years. One wanted to create a scholarship fund for underrepresented students. Another planned to launch a business incubator for minority entrepreneurs. Each goal built upon the original message: when you rise, bring others with you. At the end of the day, they gathered for a group photo. The diversity in the room was striking. Different backgrounds, industries, and experiences united by a common purpose. These weren't just workshop participants. They were the next generation of changemakers. As everyone prepared to leave, the young girl who had witnessed the original airport incident, now a year older and more confident, arrived with her mother to share an update. She had started a club at her school called Future Leaders, teaching other students about responding to prejudice with grace and success. Looking around the room at all these people committed to creating positive change, the woman thought back to that morning at the airport. What had started as a simple response to prejudice had grown into something far more powerful, a movement that was changing how people faced bias and creating new pathways for success. The workshop ended, but its impact was just beginning. As participants returned to their companies and communities, they carried with them not just strategies and plans, but a new vision of leadership, one that measured success not by personal achievement alone, but by how many others they helped lift up along the way.